July of 1964, when the Civil Rights was passed, first week of July, it became law, or at least most of it became law. And that was also the week that young African-American lawyer, UNC law graduate Julius Chambers, held out a shingle in Charlotte, North Carolina, and started practice. And Julius had spent the year before as an intern at the Legal Defense Fund, and came down to Charlotte with the backing of the Legal Defense Fund to help the implementation of move forward the implementation of the Civil Rights Act, and act as a leading civil rights litigator in North Carolina. Then, I think one of our last panelists mentioned that Adam had defended him in Hillsborough at one time. And over the next 10 years, Julius gathered around him an extraordinary group of lawyers who had an amazing impact on not only North Carolina, but the nation. They litigated hundreds of civil rights cases. They made North Carolina the central location for civil rights litigation. They won major cases in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court. And they also spent thousands of hours traveling around the state, defending demonstrators. People would get arrested for protesting segregation. The Chambers firm was there when a black police officer in Carthage, North Carolina, was killed by a Klansman. He killed the Klansman who attacked him. It was the Chambers firm that put it on. When innocent black men were charged with crimes, it was the Chambers firm that took it on. Unfortunately, Julius Chambers died 11 years ago, 2013. After being, among other things, head of the Legal Defense Fund and the Chancellor of North Carolina Central University. But we have today with us three members of this firm who were so important in those years.
Rich has gathered us together. The fact is, Rich knows more about our firm than any of us. He clerked for us, I guess, the Chapel Hill office of the firm while he was in law school. 2 years or 1 year? 2 years. And we were able to use his abilities cheaply. And over the years, we cheered him on as he went about his business of becoming a really good lawyer. So, and when I say that he knows more about the firm, he wrote a book about it. And it's called Julius Chambers, A Life in the Legal Struggle for Civil Rights. UNC Press? Yeah. So if, in fact, anybody is interested in getting the truth about some of this stuff after you hear from us, I think the book's very interesting, but I say that because I am referenced. I am not only the oldest one here, but I was the first of us to come across Julius Chambers. When I was in law school at George Washington, my brother, who was a classmate of mine, and I formed something called the Law Student Civil Rights Research Council at GW, and there was chapters at lots of law schools around the country. And they had a program for summer internships for law students, mostly to be going to help civil rights lawyers in the South, but not only that, and around and about. And they got a lot of funds from organizations that turned out to be not so wonderful, but they were wonderful in spending their money on us. And so I got and in their internship program, I made application, and I got a letter saying that you've been accepted. You can go to Charlotte, North Carolina, and work for a lawyer named J. Levon Chambers in Charlotte. And it's something I really wanted to do. I had wandered away from college and being around and not around when kind of all the civil rights activity was happening, and people of my age and generation were out demonstrating and getting arrested and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of felt that I had missed that, and it was certainly the cause that I was most interested in at that time of life. So that when I went to law school in hopes of being able to find a way to be a civil rights lawyer, and therefore that summer I applied for this clerkship. And the letter came saying, J. Levon Chambers. I had to do a little research on a couple of things. One is I wasn't really sure whether Charlotte was in North Carolina or South Carolina. I'd never been there, and I wasn't sure how you get there. It turns out it's not that hard. This J. Levon Chambers, I wanted to know was that a man or a woman? and did a little research or checking around, and found out this guy is this young superstar. First, he went to UNC Law School, and he was not only first in his class all the way through there, but was editor-in-chief of the Law Review. And for those of you who are lawyers and paid attention to that sort of thing in law school, it's pretty hard to do both of those things. If you're going to be first in your class, you can be a nerd and just kind of do that. But if you're going to be editor-in-chief of Law Review, that takes a lot of time. Anyhow, he did both of them. And kind of historically spent a fair amount of time being unhappy in Chapel Hill with the amount of racial discrimination that existed. In fact, when he was on the Law Review, there was an annual meeting of the members of the Law Review, and they held it at a country club, which happened to be all white. So he didn't go. Then tell me an example of some of the discrimination he faced. I mean, this guy finishing the #1 law school in North Carolina. I think there's a law school or two in Durham. And he kind of had done so well at the two biggest credentials you could get when you come out of law school. He couldn't get a job. Nobody wanted him, so he went to Washington to find a job, and he did get an interview with a partner in one of the main DC law firms. And the guy told him after a while, I just wanted to meet you, but we don't hire colors. And he didn't get a job. And so he went on to Columbia and got a master's in law because he didn't have anything else to do, really. So he was in New York. He was married by then. And he got his master's at Columbia. And while he was there, he was introduced to Jack Greenberg, who was then the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And Greenberg had started a program at the Legal Defense Fund, and that's the position that Thurgood Marshall began. And the program was to do internships, support new black lawyers in the South, to put them down there and train them up on civil rights law and work with them and as a way to reach out their program, litigation program, which had been started by Justice, what's his name? I'm reminding myself of our candidate for president. Marshall. I said, yeah, I'll do that. And it was very easy. We only had 2 kids at home, and my wife, and she could just sit there and take care of the kids. And I could go off and have this wonderful experience. And I did, and I went, and I met Julius Chambers, and he's just a wonderful, kind, generous person, and was a terrific mentor for a first-year law student. And I went around the state with him and met kind of all the people he was dealing with. He had spent about a year establishing his presence in North Carolina as a civil rights lawyer. And he'd started lots and lots of cases. He had a bunch of school desegregation cases he'd started, the Civil Rights Act cases under public accommodations. We had a couple of cases involving YMCA's, one in Raleigh and one in Charlotte. And in fact, I and another law student who has come for the summer, I think from Michigan, we stayed in the YMCA in Charlotte that Julius had desegregated just months earlier. When I got there, he said, well, I've got, I want you to work on a lot of these legal issues, but I've got a particular program I'd like you to head up. And I said, what? And it turned out that part of the Legal Defense Fund's program and kind of getting things going with new black lawyers was they had decided that since the Civil Rights Act, Title VII was going to go into effect that summer, July 2nd, that they hired 3 workers, one in the east, one in the west, and one in the middle, whose job it was to go around to churches and NAACP meetings and other gatherings to urge black folks to apply to businesses that had discriminated or otherwise to raise issues of racial discrimination in employment, and to get them then to file charges with the EEOC. Now the EEOC had been in effect for a year. The Civil Rights Act was passed. They delayed Title VII for a year, and they gave the EEOC time to get up and going. Well, up and going didn't include by then developing a charge form. So I was sending these guys out there to get complaints from people, and so I had to design a charge form. And we had a multi-lift machine, I think, and got a lot of them, and those guys went out and got lots of charges. In fact, there were more EEOC charges from North Carolina that summer, that year, than in the rest of the country put together. So we were kind of out front doing it, and it was really exciting for me. And also, and the forms would come in and I'd go over them, and maybe they didn't look right, and we get them edited somehow. And they looked good, and I'd send one to New York, and then New York was filing them. The reason for the intervening thing with New York was so that the Legal Defense Fund could keep track of the charges that were filed. And I worked with several of those people on their employment discrimination cases some that summer. And some of the cases were people applying for jobs that were not available then for black folks. And so there would be some help from my almost being a lawyer and them. And one of our clients who filed a claim had already been a member, had already been a client of Jewish Chambers at the Lorillard Company in Greensboro, and the union, tobacco workers union was already there, and Dorothy Robinson had been a union member somewhere else before she came back to Greensboro, where her family was from, and the way their situation was set up, the agreement between the union and the company said there were these jobs and these jobs and these jobs and in different departments, and there were black departments and white departments, and very little integration at all. And so the kind of the basic facts of the claim were not very hard to establish. But Chambers and Dorothy Robinson were already working on it already. I think they hadn't filed a lawsuit, but they intended to do. I don't remember what the claim was going to be, but they'd make something up. So I did that, and I also worked on a bunch of public accommodations cases. The YMCA case in Raleigh was a case that I did some brief writing in, and we finally won that, and then won it again in the Fourth Circuit. And I guess one that was kind of interesting was Moore's Barbecue Restaurant in New Bern, which allowed blacks to come to the back door and for takeout, but they were not allowed in the front door where you could sit down at a table. And so we had the lawsuit, and it was a popular restaurant. I was required to eat some of their barbecue, and it was really good. So the other law clerk and I were sent to New Bern to go to this restaurant and check it out, and which we did, and we were looking at the license plates of the cars in the parking lot, and whether they seemed to be hesitant about letting anybody coming in. The Title II, the public accommodations, required that there be some interstate commerce involved. So we were seeing that these cars were interstate commerce and so on. And then I got to do a lot of work on school segregation cases. We had this little case in Charlotte that went on and on and on. And it was probably after I became a lawyer and went to work for Chambers, I spent most of a year on that. That's Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education.
When I was getting ready to go into law practice, I realized that I needed to try to figure out how to do that. So I went down to the Legal Defense Fund office in New York, because I heard of them, and they had a program where they would give you some assistance if you wanted to practice civil rights law in the South. In particular, if you were a black lawyer who wanted to practice civil rights law in the South. And I wanted to do that based on some of my high school and childhood experiences and whatnot. So I wanted to be a lawyer practicing civil rights law in the South. So I heard about the Legal Defense Fund. And one day, after class at Columbia, I decided to go down to the Legal Defense Fund office to find out about that program. And just to sort of give you a little background on just how fortuitously all of this happened, it just so happened
that the day I went down to the Legal Defense Fund office to find out about their internship program, it just so happened that this Julius Chambers that I heard so much about was there that same day. I started to leave because I was afraid. But I stayed. And I got to meet Jack Greenberg and asked him about the program. And while I was there, Jack Greenberg said, by the way, I want you to meet somebody. And I said, who? He said, Julius Chambers. And I restrained myself. I was about to ride the road. I restrained myself. And so Jack Greenberg introduced me to Chambers. And you know, I was looking to meet this monster that I heard about. And when I met Chambers, you know, I could hardly hear what he said when he met me. Hey, how you doing? What's your name? I said, James Ferguson. What are you doing here? I said, I came to find out about the program. I want to go back to North Carolina to practice law. Oh, you want to go to North Carolina to practice law? What makes you think you could do that? I said, well, I don't know what I can do, but I'm willing to try. So I said, if you're serious about thinking about North Carolina, then maybe you ought to think about joining my practice. I said, well, I can think about it. I don't know what it is, but so that was my introduction to Julius Chambers. As it turns out, this is just how fortuitously all this happened. He said, if you were thinking about practicing civil rights law in North Carolina, you ought to think about joining me and what I'm trying to do. Because I got more work than I can do and I need help. So he said, why don't you think about it? I said, well, I'll think about it. And we parted that day, having met briefly. And he said, I'd like for you to come down to Charlotte and check out my practice. I said, well, I would be delighted to do that. So it's spring break. I went down to Charlotte to check out Chambers' practice because he had invited me to. And so I went to Charlotte. I met Chambers. That's my phone ringing. I don't know how to turn it off. So if it rings again, you know what that's all about. So anyway, at Easter break, I went to Charlotte. And, I met Chambers and I met his wife. I met his two children. He invited me to stay at his house, which I did for a week. And I just kind of followed him around, whatever he was doing. He never told me anything about what he was doing. I gotta do this, I gotta do it. I said, okay, I'm coming. So after following Chambers around for a week, we didn't talk that much about what I was actually going to do when I got out of college, but I was getting ready to go back to New York. And he said, by the way, I'd like for you to come join me in my practice. I'm thinking, well, I don't have anything else to do right now. I better get out and try it. So I said, okay. And on the way back to New York, I'm thinking, there's something wrong with this picture. This man does not know me, and he invited me to come practice with him. No transcript, no references, no nothing, but he invited me down to spend some time, and he's now offering me a job, and I didn't have one, so I took it. I said, okay, I would like to join your practice. So I got out of law school, and then I came to North Carolina, I took the bar exam, and I showed up at Chambers' office at the end of the summer. Because he had told me, he's going to give me a job. I said, okay. And it just so turns out that I think the same day I showed up, Adam showed up. I didn't know Adam, Adam didn't know me. I just did know Chambers based on that. So I met Adam, not knowing at the time that Adam had been offered a job with Chambers as well. not knowing either that, at the same time, that Chambers had no office for either Adam or me. But it did turn out that he had an oversized closet in which he kept his law books and whatnot. And there was a table, maybe about the size of this table right here, in this oversized office. And what I didn't know and soon learned that oversized closet with a table in it and 2 chairs was Adam's office and mine. I'm sorry. Adam said it had a telephone, and I believe that. So that's how Adam and I got to meet. Neither one of us knew the other was coming. But there we were, and needless to say, in this small office with this table, that we spent together in for the next, I think it was about 6 or 8 months, we got to know each other very well. And it turned out, we connected, with being right there, right across from each other, and not knowing from day to day what we were going to do in the office, because mainly what happened was Chandler would come in with some case of somebody who came in the door and needed a lawyer. And he said, but I got this case. Fergie, what you doing today? I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, why don't you go down and represent this client? Well, if that's all right with the client, it's all right with me. That was kind of how it was the first year. Here's that phone again. I made it stop for a while. But anyway, that was the first year. So needless to say, Adam and I got to know each other very well during that period of about from September until I think it was May. And I think around May, Chambers came up with the idea that we were going to have a law firm. So during that period of time, I think either Adam or Chambers had met another young lawyer around Charlotte. His name was Jim Lanning. And they invited Lanning to join the firm as well. So, I'm fine with it. They wanted to invite people to join the firm. So we got to know Lanning. But at that time, Adam and I were utilizing the small closet with chairs and a table in it. So we had to have somewhere to go. So Chambers had this grand plan that we were going to move the office to another location. And sure enough, he had talked to a gentleman there by the name of Malachi Green, who had a big house over in a section called 4th Ward in Charlotte. And Chambers and Mr. Green worked out some kind of plan where Mr. Green renovated the house. And that's where our office was. Very nice office, a 2-story house, beautiful house in 4th Ward. So at the end of the year, not the end of the year, but around May of the next year, we started having a serious talk about setting up a law firm. So it was Adam, me, Chambers, and now Lanning. So we said everybody wanted to continue what we were doing, although we didn't know what it was. So we talked about it, everybody agreed that's what we would do. And it occurred to us that we ought to have a name for the firm. So we decided to do it by seniority. Chambers, of course, being the originator of the firm, would be the first name in the firm. And as it turned out, Adam and I, who had come on the same day, didn't know what we were going to do about that. So we did what people always do when they have complicated decisions to make and they don't really know quite how to do it. We decided we were going to work this out. So we said, and then Lanning, having come after Adam, he would be the last name of the firm. So in order to figure out what the second name would be, we did what you do when you have complicated decisions to work out. We decided to flip a coin. And if you know the name of the firm, what it was. You know, Adam won the flip. So the firm became Chambers, Stein, Ferguson, and Lanning as a result of the flip. So that's how much planning went into I'm sorry?
How did you all manage to have such an impact?
Well, I mean, the true answer is I don't know, but the actual answer is also that I'm going to just tell, like, because we were young and crazy, thought we could do whatever we wanted to do. And so Chambers' attitude was that any black person, especially those with no money, needed to have a lawyer, and our job was to represent them if we could. And Chambers' idea was that you take on whoever needed lawyers because in his own experience, his father had tried to get a lawyer in this little town called Mount Gilead, where Chambers grew up, because a white person in Mount Gilead refused to pay Chambers' father for working on his car. And Chambers' father wanted to pursue the case and get money from this man who wouldn't pay him. But he couldn't get a lawyer in town to take his case. There were no black lawyers in Mount Gilead at that time. So that stayed with Chambers, and he always felt that any person who needed a lawyer should be able to get one. And that was sort of the philosophy, if you want to call it that, of the firm throughout. And so the idea was that whoever came to the firm with a problem, we would try to do what we could to represent them. And of course, a lot of our focus was doing civil rights work that was beginning to develop at that time. Now, what I do have to tell you is that civil rights work at that time was a legal case of any black person who thought they had a case. So, if somebody came into the office and had no money and usually no case, we took it. That, in short, is how the firm developed. So the truth of the matter is we were just lucky in many ways, but we had committed people. Chambers was I don't need to tell you, was as committed as anyone ever. Adam was equally committed, and I had always known that I wanted to do law in North Carolina, I wanted to do civil rights law in North Carolina. So I was committed, and Lanning, who we had brought in, was committed, so we were committed to do something, and we did what we could, and it worked out. I hesitate to say all that because some people think this was all planned, and that we knew what we were doing. I'm here to tell you we did not know what we were doing. But we did what we knew, and that was to try to help folks who needed help. And it worked out. It worked out. And over time, people who didn't know what we were doing thought we were doing good stuff, and they weren't. Consequently, Mel Watt sitting on my right, and Mel found his way to the office. I don't know how he got in, because I have to tell you that the day Mel came to the office, he was wearing the biggest afro. I have never seen it. But somehow he worked around and got that afro in the door. And we were supposed to be interviewing Mel, but I had already decided anybody who could figure out how to get in the door with an afro that big can probably figure out how to be a good lawyer. So he already had one vote, and everybody else went along with it by the time he came along. So I want to tell you all the stuff so you just know how well planned this law firm was right from the beginning. And with all sincerity, I have to say that as it turned out, we did wind up with a collection of a group of the absolute best lawyers that we could have found, no matter what we had done. We had collected resumes, researched and tried to figure out who were the best lawyers who to do this kind of work. We could not have come up with a better group of people than we did. And I say that in all sincerity. Throughout, I think the entire time that we were building the firm and doing the work that we all wanted to do, it was remarkable how things just came together. Chambers was as brilliant a lawyer and as committed a lawyer as one could ever hope to have. And what some people eventually learned but didn't know is that Adam Stein was equally brilliant. He manifested it in another way. Adam is the best legal researcher and analyst and writer that any law firm could have ever hoped to have. So, and that's a lot of what he did. He wasn't always out there on the front lines like Chambers was, getting known. But in many ways, Adam was a big part of the glue that kept the firm together and enabled us to do the work that we did. Now, I'll tell you one other little quick about the firm that folks ought to know. Chambers was a great litigator. But I remember the first time I went to the Supreme Court when Chambers was doing a case. I'm not sure which case it was, but I do remember that when Chambers got up to argue his case, I'm there, fairly new at all this, trying to, figure out how you argue cases in the Supreme Court. Chambers got up, walked to the podium to do his argument, and he spoke so low, the justices could not hear him. So the minute he opened his mouth to speak, not being able to hear him, they all leaned over Vic, so he had the full attention of all of us in the court trying to hear what the hell is this man saying. And somehow that worked out to a victory in the case. So, and that was Chambers' manner. He always spoke in a whisper. You had to lean over to hear what he was saying. I don't think he planned it that way, but it worked out that way. So he always got attention when he was talking to somebody, because they didn't know what the hell he was saying.
I'm going to do like Trump did in the last presidential debate. I want to go back to the last question. Can I just go back to the last question? Because the question you asked was, how did the law firm, and Ferguson started to answer it, but he didn't finish. He's absolutely right. Julius Chambers is one of the most brilliant lawyers any of us have ever met or dealt with. The guy was just brilliant and committed. Adam Stein, one of the most brilliant researchers and writers that anybody has ever seen. James Ferguson, probably one of the best trial lawyers in the whole United States of America. So that answers that question. I mean, and during this time, things were evolving, and people had good legal cases. The law was there, and so it worked out. I met Chambers actually maybe before you called it. It so happened that the very first day he showed up in Charlotte, or was about to open a firm in Charlotte, his office was on East Trade Street, and it was in a building that had some other professionals in it. And the dentist, my dentist, was in that building. Most of what you have heard here from these two guys, I've never heard before. I'm fascinated by the story about how this all came together. But then it continues to be fascinating because I'm going to, this is in 1963. I'm getting ready to start the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I need dental work, right? So I walk into my dentist's office, and he says, you can't get out of here without going upstairs and meeting Jewish Chambers. Oh, wow. And so I go upstairs after my dental work to meet Jewish Chambers, and we kind of stayed marginally in contact with each other all the way through my undergraduate time at Carolina. And then when I went on to law school, we stayed in regular contact with each other. And then as Elaine Jones would say it, I got excommunicated from the Legal Defense Fund in New York. They say Jack Greenberg sent me down to Charlotte to get rid of me. After interestingly enough, the Legal Defense Fund made a decision not to represent Angela Davis. And all of the staff of the Legal Defense Fund wanted to represent Angela Davis, except Jim Nabrit and Jack Greenberg, because they were afraid that it would interfere with the funding of the Legal Defense Fund. And so by that time, this was 1970 by that time, 1971 I guess it was. By that time, I was out of law school, and I had turned down an offer for the law firm, and then decided that I really did want to come to work for the law firm. So I called Chambers. He had given my job to somebody else, and called Jack Greenberg in New York and talked him into taking me on the staff in New York. So you had all these interns around the South in various law firms, and I was the only intern, although Jack thought I was a staff lawyer, it turns out, which is why we fell out and he excommunicated me. And this thing went all the way to the board of the Legal Defense Fund to make a decision about whether to represent Angela Davis. And because I was the only intern in New York, they asked me to read the intern statement in support of representing Angela Davis. And Jack Greenberg decided I was a troublemaker as a result of that, basically. And so I would keep going back and forth to Jack Greenberg and saying, can I just move my family back to North Carolina? I'm splitting my time half and half. I'm going, I'd like to move my family back down there. And he would always say, oh, no, you're on the staff, you're going to learn to love New York. And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. But so after I read the statement for the interns, the next time I went to Jack Greenberg and asked him, he said, I thought you were gone long time. So I came back to North Carolina, and Fergie, I'm surprised he didn't tell this story, but by that time they were in this house in Fourth Ward, right down the street from where I live now. In the middle of the night, on February 3 of 1971, in the middle of an ice storm, the office got firebombed, right? And that happened to be, I was supposed to report to work on February 4 of 1971. Well, before I got there, the office was firebombed. And I had come back to Charlotte with the express intent, because this was intentional. The law firm had talked about it, I had talked about it. I wasn't really interested in doing what would be characterized as stereotypical civil rights law. But by that time, they had litigated cases, and people were getting better jobs, and teachers were coming to them, and businesses were coming to them. And my job was to develop a minority business practice in a civil rights law firm. Then the law firm gets firebombed, and the first project I got is to try to find a place for us to have an office. I mean, this is, you can't make this stuff up. And so in the middle of that, we were talking to a bunch of lawyers and doctors and pharmacists and other professional people. And we decided we're going to build a great big office building. So within 1 year after I came to the law firm, I'm building the biggest minority-owned office building in the whole Southeast. We developed a $4 million project. I mean, you can't even imagine how much money $4 million was in 1971. But a 7-story office building where the law firm ultimately ended up moving to. And people just kept coming. I mean, people kept having civil rights cases. Businesses started developing. I had the largest minority automobile dealership representation of any lawyer in the country. The A&E Zion extension, the financial arm of the A&E Zion Church was based in Charlotte. And we ended up representing the A&E Zion, the whole financial, we did all of their litigation. Things have a way of working out if you just keep working at it. And I owe a lot to these guys here. I owe everything to Julius Chambers and to these two guys. They believed in baptism by fire. And I never will forget being sent down to Wilmington, North Carolina to represent Kojo Nantambu. Only because Fergie had a conflict. I mean, it was a criminal case. I wasn't even supposed to be doing criminal cases. And it was a criminal case. Fergie had a conflict, so Chambers said, hey, you and Adam go down there. You can't send this white man down there by himself to Wilmington, North Carolina, so you got to go down there and sit at his right hand and help him out. And Adam Stein selects the jury and then turns to me and says, "The case is all yours." I'm serious, this is serious. You can't make this up. And of course, Kojo went to jail. He's a good I mean, nobody was going to be able to save him other than Fergie. Maybe if Fergie had tried to Kingston, maybe he had some chance, but he didn't have any chance with me and Adam. But he's a wonderful guy, and he was minding his business anyway. That's how I got to the firm, and two stories that I can't resist telling. Chambers, I'm the business lawyer in the law firm. He's got all these people, and none of them coming to see Mel Watt. Who the hell is Mel Watt? Every time a business client would come in the door, they would come in to see Chambers. Chambers would sit me at his right hand, and then about 5 minutes into the meeting, he'd say, "I gotta go now. Mel's gonna take care of you. He can handle this for me." So he'd be gone. I mean, you know, and so I started to build a nice business practice. And then one day, Chambers came to me and said, "I'm going up to Soul City, North Carolina." And the first time I ever heard of Soul City was with Julius Chambers. He took me to Soul City, and guess what? I mean, you can't make these stories up. At Soul City, Harvey Gantt was working as an architect in Soul City. First time I ever met Harvey Gantt was with Julius Chambers. I ended up representing him every time he ever ran for city council, every time he ever ran for mayor, every time he ever ran for the United States Senate. And he was responsible for me getting in because he wouldn't run for the North Carolina House, for the U.S. House. He was responsible for me ending up in the U.S. House of Representatives. I can't make this up. My favorite story about Julius Chambers, though, he sent me down to represent a bunch of Native Americans in Lumberton who were charged with resisting arrest, parading without a permit, using spears and things. I mean, none of them had guns or anything. It was all spears and things that Native Americans, I guess, used. They were having a demonstration, and all of them got arrested. And Julius sent me down there to represent them. So I go down there, and I start talking to them, and what they were demonstrating about is they didn't want to send their children to school with black students. No, I'm serious. This is a serious story. I got so angry at Julius, I jumped back in my car, I ran back up Highway 74 from Lumberton to Charlotte. I stormed into Chambers' office. I said, "Chambers, why would you send me all the way to Lumberton to represent a bunch of Indians who didn't want to send their children to school with black kids?" Julius didn't even look up from his desk. He said, "Don't you believe in the First Amendment?" I learned more that one day about the First Amendment to the United States Constitution than I had learned from Bob Bork at Yale Law School, or any of those people who had taught me constitutional law at Yale Law School. That one experience taught me more about the First Amendment than I had ever understood. because those people were demonstrating, not because they were demonstrating for something that I liked. This is a firm that represented the KKK, right? I mean, yeah, maybe Julian, he believed in the Constitution of the United States better than, and he understood it. He understood what it was supposed to be. You know, it was written for white men, and wasn't intended for women or black folks. But the Constitution itself, there wasn't anybody in America that understood its promise